Protein is the most important macronutrient when it comes to muscle building, but also muscle retention. Um, and that's probably the most important thing when it comes to the general population, right? So with protein, if you're doing any kind, even if you're not athletically training, but if you're doing any kind of athletic training, then even if muscle gain wasn't necessarily your goal, you're trying to strengthen your muscles and you're trying to strengthen, like bone density and things like that, right? So protein is the most important macronutrient because it is the building block of all types of bodily tissue, from hair, skin, nails, all of those things. So if you're not getting sufficient amount of protein in, particularly then when weight training, you're going to have some issues there. I think the issue it comes about is because there are a lot of like myths and scares around protein, and the recommended daily amount, I don't know what it's like for you guys, but in the UK it's like 0.8 grams per kilo is what's recommended to us in terms of grams per kilo of body weight. And that's because that's been the amount that's shown to avoid a deficiency in protein. So it's not at all where we would want to be for like an optimal health standpoint, particularly if you're training. So if you're training, your protein needs will be higher than someone who isn't training. But even then, from a, let's call it like a health muscle gain issue, it's super important, and there's a lot of research now to support higher protein diets being beneficial for health in a number of manners. From a weight loss perspective, it has an added benefit because of its effect on appetite. So protein in one meal and across 24 hours has been shown to improve people's satiety, which is basically their appetite regulation. So they're feeling more satisfied with singular meals as well as over a course of 24 hours, with higher protein diets versus lower protein diets. So if you're trying to lose body fat, you're going to be more full over fewer calories, particularly because high protein foods, especially the lower fat ones, are quite bulky for their calorie amount. So, they're quite high volume for the calories you get from them. And then there's also research to suggest that despite zero change in the appetite hormones within a human, there's a lower spontaneous energy intake in people who try to eat higher protein foods. So their energy consumption around those meals is lower as well. So there's quite a bit of research to suggest that. The second benefit for weight loss with high protein is because, again, if you're putting yourself into a calorie deficit, so you're eating fewer calories in order to drop body fat, your protein needs are going to become a little bit more necessary, especially if you're training, because if you're training and your energy needs are slightly lower than maintenance, your body's going to try and pull energy from places, and it could pull it from your muscle tissues. So by keeping a higher protein diet, you're going to retain more muscle tissue and burn more fat compared to those with a lower protein diet.
Okay, amazing. So you kind of answered my second question of the difference between, because you can lose weight
Mm-hmm.
not eating enough protein. I mean, people are vegan
Yeah.
and go on a calorie deficit. So how big of a difference other than maybe satiety you just mentioned, the lose muscle, is there anything else that there's a difference between someone trying to lose weight who's not eating enough protein and someone who is and
I,
still on a deficit?
I think the biggest difference would be the muscle retention, because a big thing about calorie deficits can sometimes be like metabolic adaptation and like metabolic slowdown of like adapting to lower calories, and that would still happen, regardless of muscle retention and protein. But it would be the issue of muscle retention mainly through a caloric deficit. And if you're vegetarian or vegan, it's just ensuring that you are getting in enough protein despite those food choices, because that's probably the biggest problem, is that within the research, when they compare people of equal caloric deficits for different protein, you'll see then a different amount of fat loss and a different amount of muscle retention in the groups based on the amount of protein that they have.
Okay. And how would someone calculate how much protein they need? Because what you said makes a lot of sense. Maybe people are operating under the number that you need to not be deficient in.
Mm.
They think that's enough, but they're exercising, they're lifting weights, they're wanting to lose body fat, they're wanting to gain muscle. So how would they figure out how much they need?
Yeah, so it depends on their goal and then the amount of activity they're doing. Because as I mentioned, if you're just regularly going about your life, that the RDA, the recommended daily amount, is that low threshold. But with the research that we've got ongoing, they're suggesting that even now, if you're a regular person who's interested in optimal health and not weight training too much, you should still be around 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And